Hey guys, welcome to my new channel. In the coming weeks I'm going to be sharing my audiophile hobby with you all. So we're going to be looking at some of my equipment, and there'll be selections from my vinyl collection and my CD collections. I've been into hi-fi and music ever since I was a little kid, and I went through a few phases over the years, you know, putting together my first system in the 80s with, you know, money I earned mowing lawns and working at McDonald's after school, and did some upgrades of that in the 90s, and then in the 2000s went through a phase where, you know, I went through a few AV receivers and had a home theater set up in the living room, and then I had some vintage solid state gear in another room that I used just for music because it sounded a lot better. So I stuck with the vintage stuff for a long time, but then, you know, in the last 2 or 3 years through YouTube, you know, I've discovered sort of budget audiophile gear, and that's been great. So that's the road I'm going down right now. Today I'm just going to show you my primary stereo in my listening room here, and I tallied it up. I think I've spent about $2,500 on all this stuff, but you know, I'm swapping things in and out all the time, so that's going to change down the road. But for now, let's take a look at my main system. So this is my main stereo. The room we're in is relatively small. It's about 11 by 11 feet, and I do have a lot of stuff crammed in here, but it works out fine. I'm able to fit everything. So you can see I've got part of my CD collection over here on the left. I've got some of my vinyl collection, some cassette stuff, some more binders of CDs. So a few years ago I actually had moved a bunch of my CD collection into these binders. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Kind of wish I hadn't done it now, but at least I still have all of this stuff. So I have a fairly big music collection, and I have a few more folders and vinyl albums in the closets in the other room. But I try to keep everything that I listen to on a regular basis in here, which makes it real easy to listen to music when I want to. So the other thing I have in this room, if we pan over to the other side, is I have another stereo set up as part of my studio for recording ambient guitar music. So if you'd like to check out any of that stuff, I'll have a link to my other YouTube channel in the description below. But this is where I record all of that stuff and then mix it, and I've got a stereo over here which works out very well for that for a number of reasons. I'm not going to go into that in this video, but I may talk about that in a future video. But this stereo is not as good for listening to music, so that's why I've got two separate ones in here. And then I've got my main chair over here, which I use for working on mixing and recording at the desk, and then I can turn it around and then use it to listen to my main stereo. So when I'm sitting in that chair, my ears are about 6 feet away from the tweeters, so it's a near-field listening situation, and that actually works out pretty well for these LS50s, and I'll talk a little bit more about that a little later in the video. So the only other thing we have in here, obviously, is there is unfortunately a bed, as this room is currently being used also as a guest bedroom. The good thing about that is that it does soak up a lot of sound, which helps, although this room is still a little on the live side, which you can probably tell by the sound of my voice. But the acoustics are actually, they're pretty good for listening, and I'm going to be adding a rug in here soon and maybe some more treatment so we can maybe fine-tune that where we want it to be, but it works for now. So let's go ahead and take a look at my main stereo. So this is the amplifier in my system, a PS Audio Sprout 100. So I bought this when it first came out as a replacement for the original Sprout, sometime in 2018 I think. And I had already started playing around with budget audiophile speakers at the time, but this was the first entry-level audiophile amplifier that I had purchased. and I really didn't know too much about it. This was before all the YouTube reviews had come out. And I got it mainly because I am a fan of Paul McGowan's channel, and I've always been interested in PS audio gear, but I couldn't previously afford any of it. So how does this stack up to the vintage solid state gear I was using before? Well, first of all, I should mention I've never had any high-end vintage stuff. You know, I've had some nice Macintosh, Marantz, and Sherwood receivers. But the first thing you'll notice when switching to the Sprout from those is that it has a much more defined soundstage. So all of the decent receivers I've had in the past will produce a soundstage that comes from behind the speakers, and you'll be able to hear the different instruments, you know, from left to right. But the soundstage has no real depth. It's kind of like all the players are crowded at the front of the stage. And the Sprout provides a real sense of depth, and you know, it's just generally more holographic. So you know, I like that a lot. And then the second big difference is just with the bass. You know, the Sprout, it may not have the most natural bass in the world compared to, you know, more expensive modern gear. But it is a big step up from the vintage gear I was using in terms of, you know, the fullness and definition and speed. And of course the Sprout has bass boost, which I usually leave on, but it's nice that you can defeat it and turn it off, which I do for certain tracks. So this has a vinyl input that uses Sprout's internal photo preamp. Then we have an analog in, we have a digital in via either USB or Toslink, and then we have Bluetooth. So the vinyl and analog are great with my sources, and we'll go over that in a bit. And the digital works really well with my CD player, and even the Bluetooth is, you know, surprisingly good. I mean, we all know Bluetooth is lossy, but it actually sounds pretty good when I stream it from my MacBook Pro. So that MacBook Pro is like about circa 2015, I think. So I will mention, I do have an older MacBook Pro, circa, you know, probably 2009. And I have a big library on it, a bunch of Apple lossless files. And I did have that connected here via USB, but unfortunately it just didn't sound very good. You know, so I was using, you know, not the greatest USB cable, and I was planning to get a better one. But then, you know, I was surprised at how good the Bluetooth sounded when it connected to my newer MacBook that I used for recording. And the old one just didn't sound that great over Bluetooth either. So, you know, I think maybe Bluetooth must have come a long way from 2009 to 2015, or, you know, there's some other issue on the older MacBook Pro, and maybe it's noisier, the software, you know, something. But it just, the setup didn't work very well with that older laptop. So for all streaming, I'm using the newer one. And I'm using that mainly to, you know, discover new music on the internet, and you know, if something catches my interest and I want to do some serious listening, then I always buy it on CD or vinyl currently. Now, you know, I may get more serious about streaming down the road, but you know, I'll need to investigate possibly, you know, better gear or software for that, I think. But I have to say that, you know, it is surprisingly good, better than I was expecting on the Sprout. So yeah, you know, overall I really like the Sprout. You know, I don't have a frame of reference for comparing it to other new audiophile gear, but at the moment, you know, it's the nicest amp I currently have for just enjoying music. So, you know, as we all know, there are a lot of affordable Class AB amplifiers out there, and I do want to check some of those out, and, you know, possibly even upgrade at some point in the not too distant future. But, you know, even if I do, I'll definitely be holding on to the Sprout, because, you know, I could always move it to another room and it would make a really nice setup, you know, anywhere. So I think it's a good thing to hold on to. So right next to the Sprout, we have a Schiit Valley 2 and a Schiit Modi 3. So the Valley 2 is a nice headphone amp that I really like, but, you know, I haven't really used it enough to give you guys any detailed observations right now. You know, I do listen to headphones quite a bit and have some nice pairs, but I only really use them when I can't use speakers. I do prefer speakers. So, you know, if I'm like hanging out with my wife in the living room and we're both listening to our laptops or iPads or something like that. But, you know, I don't currently use it that much in here. And now the Modi 3, of course, is Schiit's entry-level external DAC. And my wife just got me this puppy for Christmas, so I haven't had a chance to set it up yet. But my plan is to start experimenting with different external DACs and see how they compare to one another and to the you know, ESS Sabre chip that's built into the Sprout. And then depending on how it goes, you know, I may upgrade to a Bifrost or some other DAC at some point. And then I thought maybe I would take these two pieces maybe into the living room so I could have a better headphone listening experience in there. But you know, I'm just starting down that road, so we'll see. Okay, so next let's take a look at the speakers I'm currently using. So these are my KEF LS50s. So when I first purchased the Sprout, I hooked it up to some ELAC B5s that I had previously been using with a vintage receiver. And that pairing worked out really well, and I actually kept it that way for several months. Then I upgraded to the LS50s, which I've now been using for a few months as well. And you know, I wanted a pair of LS50s for a long time, but you know, I was a little concerned with how well they would pair with the Sprout based on some reviews I'd watched on YouTube. And yeah, you know, while there is some synergy between the LS50s and the Sprout, there are also some drawbacks, which I'll talk a little bit about. So first I had worried that the pairing might be too bright, but this turned out not to be the case. I don't find the LS50s to be bright in terms of, you know, boosted highs, but there is a lot of detail in the highs. You hear a lot of little things that are hard to hear, you know, if at all, on some other speakers, but that's one of the things that I actually like a lot about these. But I do feel that this pairing is not quite as versatile as the Sprout was with the B5s. If you listen to a lot of different types of music like I do, so I'm going through a bit of a classical phase at the moment, and with really good classical recordings, this combination actually sounds pretty amazing. You know, the soundstage isn't huge, but you really get the sense, you know, that you're at a live event, which, you know, is really exciting. And this pairing sounds really good with good jazz recordings too. You know, I still listen to a fair amount of jazz. You saw a little bit of my jazz collection in one of the binders in that earlier segment. And, you know, it works really well for that too. So where this combination falls down a little bit for me is with rock music and some of the heavier electronic music that I listen to. You know, as has been noted in lots of other videos, it's just not very muscular, and so with the Sprout, it ends up sounding a little bit bland with a lot of recordings. You know, so the other day I was listening to this double CD of Physical Graffiti. Let's see if I can get this focused for you guys. And you know, with stuff like this, you know, if you take the track In the Light, for example, you know, in the beginning it sounds really cool, you know, with the John Paul Jones organ panning from right to left and all the ambient stuff going on. But as soon as the drums kick in, you know, it does start to sound a little, you know, weird and anemic. So I think for a lot of this kind of stuff, the Sprout with the B5s was a better combination. It just rocked out a little more. But with that said, I do really like the LS50s, and I'm kind of addicted to the detail level and sustain on the metal dome tweeters. The mid-range and bass are also very good. So, you know, I'm thinking at some point I'll probably move the Sprout back with the B5s in the living room, and then I'll potentially upgrade the amp in here to something a little bit more beefy. I'm thinking maybe a Shit Audio Ragnarok 2 might be a good choice. There's always the Outlaw RR 2160. I'm not super crazy with how that one looks, but you know, it sounds like a good deal for the price. So yeah, you know, I'll keep you guys updated, and we'll see where we go next with that. So I think we'll end this first video here since it's getting a little long, but I will post a part 2 where we'll take a look at my sources, a tuner, my turntables, a CD player, and as well as cables and you know, some other stuff. So yeah, in the meantime, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you all in the next video.